Hey, welcome to this live stream about chord function. So if you're part of the replay crew, let us know where you're coming from. And as always, we're going to be geeking out about some really important stuff in music. And a lot of times it's not discussed because sometimes people don't even know that it's a question to ask. What makes music tick? How does it really work when you get into the patterns of things? And so we're going to get into some really fundamental patterns when it comes to songwriting, chord progressions, and just what makes a song really work. So chord function is something that is actually surprisingly, what's the word I'm looking for? It's when people disagree on something, it's controversial. So you would think, like, how could music and specifically chord progressions be controversial? Let's get into it. So a chord function is something that you may have heard about, and you may not have heard about. Either way, let's jump in. So we're going to start with some chords, and these chords are in the key of G. We're going to be sticking with the key of G here for all of these illustrations, but these same ideas apply to every key, every major key. And we'll come back to that caveat here at the end or throughout, that these chord functions apply to a major key specifically. And so let's look at these chords. So G major includes 7 chords. We've got a G major chord, which is a 1 chord, an A minor chord, which is a minor 2, a B minor chord, which is a minor 3, C, which is a major 4, D5, E minor, which is the minor 6, an F sharp diminished chord, which is the 7 chord, and then back to G. Now, when you play chords like this, it's one thing to just learn where to place your fingers, which is an important part of playing, but that's where a lot of people stop. They're just like, all right, now I know where to press my fingers. Tell me what to do next. And a lot of people are happy to tell you just what to do next. But the whole point of learning music theory is to embrace your humanity and be able to direct yourself on where to go. Learning the patterns and why they work to be able to go in the directions that you want to. So let's dive a little further into these chords and make sense of how we can arrange them in different ways that make sense using the power of chord function. So looking at these chords, you'll notice that they sound very much like the G major scale itself. So down here we have the G major scale, and those notes in sequence are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. That's the G major scale, and the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we come back to G. Now, if we play those chords in sequence, you'll notice that it sounds a lot like the G major scale itself, but fleshed out or on steroids. So it's a harmonic version of the G major scale. So it's notice that that's basically like the G major scale, but in harmonic form. So just as with the notes of a scale, you can rearrange those notes in different ways to come up with melodies. Basically, a melody in a given key is just the notes of that pattern, of that scale in this example, rearranged to form a pleasing melody. Well, you can do basically the same thing with chords, where you rearrange the chords in different ways to come up with different progressions. So the chord sequence we just played, chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to 1, is like the G major scale, and we can arrange those chords in different ways. So, for example, if we go from G to C, for example, so I'm just following the arrows that are already there, G to C, and then let's play, then let's go to A minor and E minor, and then we'll play this B minor to G and just see what that sounds like. So G to C, A minor, E minor, B minor, G. It's not really that great of a chord progression. Sounds a little bit disjointed, or there's not a lot of momentum there, but you get the idea that at least the chords sound pleasing together, where we could, come up with different progressions that will sound at least pleasing based on the fact that they come from the same key. They're compatible from the same harmonic set. Now, we could take these chords of the key, like we just looked at, G, A minor, B minor, C, D, E minor, F sharp diminished, and G. We can select some of those chords and come up with different options. So, for example, option 1 is just 4 of the chords. We trimmed out some of them, and we're just playing G, A minor, E minor, C, and then come back to G, and it sounds really nice. So let me play that once again without talking over it. All right, check. Sounds awesome. Let's look at option 2. So we're playing a D, C, B minor, and G. So it's play it one more time. Sounds nice. So we're playing that sequence. So 5, 4, 3, and 1. That sounds nice. Option 3, which is right here, is a G, C, D, and G. And again, all of these examples are in the key of G, but again, these same ideas apply to every key. We're just focusing on G for purposes of illustration. So 1, 4, 5, 1. You hear that like all the time because it's so pleasing, the 1, 4, 5, 1. So play again. Okay, option 3 also sounds awesome. But so far, all we're doing is we're just taking the chords of that key and just rearranging them in different ways to come up with different effects. They're all pleasing, but what's up with this? Why are we using these chords, and what is propelling them forward in a pleasing, compelling kind of chord progression? Let's dig a little further. So we've already stepped beyond just the monkey see, monkey do of playing chords and just pressing our fingers. Now we're starting to incorporate Roman numerals, which is telling us how the chords fit in context to one another and how they relate to the underlying scale degrees of the key. Let's look even further at why we're playing these chords in any given sequence, why it works. Now, just to step back here for a moment, I'm using actually examples from lesson 7 of the music theory course. Some of these illustrations and examples are from the course. There's a lot more detail, a lot more explanation that I'm going through here. So definitely check that out. One, if you've seen it, it's worth a refresher. And if you haven't seen it, definitely soak that in because it explains and goes into much more detail than we're doing here. But let's continue. So we're looking at, so far, some examples in the key of G, just stringing different chords together in a progression, which is nice. But why? Why are we playing the chords in this way? So let's look at the patterns at play here and see if we can figure out the theory that's informing what we're playing. So if we take cyclical pitch space, which is basically just taking the 12 notes of music, wrapping them into a loop, because music is cyclical, it repeats. And we just look at the G major scale in this example. We have the G major scale, so we're playing G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then back to G. So that's the pattern where we went. Okay, so that's what we started with as the scale. And playing the chords that are based on that scale, by combining the notes, we come up with the 7 chords. Now, this may look like an image from the occult. It may look like like this kind of mystical thing, but really all this is showing us is that we're combining the notes in certain intervals. So for example, the 1 chord, the G chord, starts on G, the G major chord, goes to B, and then you add in D, and we have the G major chord. So that's G major, G, B, and D. Then the 2 chord, the minor 2 chord, starts on A, and we play A, C, and E, and together A, C, and E form an A minor chord, which is the minor 2. So we went from 1 to 2. And then the same pattern applies. I'm going to do one more, but you get the idea. So B, the minor 3 chord is B to D to F sharp. B, D, and F sharp combined are a B minor chord. So G, A minor, B minor, and so on. We can play C, D, E minor, F sharp diminished, and back to G. So we're kind of seeing some patterns here, and it's going to inform. You can tell there's something going on here, even though we haven't totally unpacked what these patterns are showing us. We will here in a second, but you can tell there's something going on here. There's definitely a method to the madness. Music theory is all about patterns, and there's clearly a pattern going on here. And if we take, I talk about this rotation between the chromatic scale, which is the 12 notes of music, and the circle of fifths, which is a pattern that explains how all of the notes are related. I explain this in detail in other videos and live streams here, but the idea is if you take this scrambled pattern of the chromatic scale, where we have a G and then A flat and A and B flat and B and C and D flat and D and so on, all of the notes in chromatic order, and we rotate every other note. So for example, we rotate all of the circle shaped notes 180 degrees. We rearrange the notes into a color wheel, or also known as the circle of fifths. And when you do that, you can see how all of the notes that were in the G major scale end up being neighbors in the circle of fifths. Likewise, all of the chords are closely related. They're all neighbors in the circle of fifths. So we have this grouping, or this neighborhood of compatible chords. G major, the major 1, is nestled between C, the 4, and D, the 5. So we have G, C, D, and G. So that's why that third option that we just played a moment ago of G or 1, C4, D5, and G1 sounded good, because those 3 chords, based on the underlying patterns of music, place those chords as neighbors in the circle of fifths. Likewise, the minor chords are out here, and the diminished chord is out here. So we have all of the major chords forming a group, all of the minor chords forming a group of neighbors, then we have the diminished chord over here. Now, so far we're getting some pretty cool insight into why the chords are neighbors, and why they're compatible, why they sound good together in chord progressions, and how you can arrange those chords using these patterns to our advantage to create momentum, to create progressions that flow well between neighbors, between musical friends in the circle of fifths. But there's more to it. It's more than just playing around with this circle. There's actually kind of you have to think almost counterintuitively, or it's almost like what we're about to look at is almost like looking at a Magic Eye poster. If you remember those, I think they were like big in the 1990s, where you have to almost like not focus on the image and use your peripheral vision and kind of zone out for the image to come in focus. It's very counterintuitive and super frustrating if you've never seen a Magic Eye image. But once you see it, once the Magic Eye image, once you know how to look for what you're looking for, it pops out and it's magical what you see. So let's do the metaphorical magical eye or Magic Eye image with these patterns of music. And so we're going to come back to that G major scale, our foundational pattern, and looking at it in this table format like this is going to help illuminate chord function. We're going to arrive at chord function looking at it this way. So we start with the G major scale, which is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to 8. And just like we looked at in that circular format where we just picked out every other note to play the G major chord, we get G, B, and D, G, B, and D to get the one chord. A, C, and E minor, or A, C, and E, that is, creates the A minor chord. So A, C, and E is the minor chord, and then A minor, and then B minor is the B, D, and F sharp, and so on. So using this table, we can pick out the 7 chords. And like I say, in lesson 7 of the music theory course, go into way more detail. And I talk about these patterns in other live streams, other videos of how to dissect a major scale to derive different chords. But we're going to kind of go through the next couple of steps at a quicker pace than I talk about elsewhere. But I want to arrive at a really important pattern that really explains chord function. So let's just kind of look at these next diagrams. So here we have, looking at these chords in this table format, there are some interesting things that jump out, which are, and I'm using these little face icons to represent general qualities of these chords. Now, you might disagree that a major chord, like I have here, and these 2 major chords aren't necessarily happy sounding chords, but these are generalities to describe major chords. They generally sound more happy. And then you have these minor chords, minor 2, minor 3, and this minor 6, which are marked here by frowny faces, because minor chords do tend to have more of a melancholy vibe. Again, these are general descriptions, and this isn't even chord function, but this will make more sense here in a moment. And then we have a diminished chord shown by this fairly despondent looking face. I don't know, it's almost like a wailing face that is especially sad. So if we play those chords in order again, we have G major, the G, B, and D, 1, 3, 5 sounds fairly, upbeat or happy. And then we have the A minor chord. Ooh, it's a little more pensive, a little more sadder sounding. And then B minor, still kind of relatively sad or melancholy. And then we go through 2 major chords, which sound relatively happy. C major, D major, the happier chords. Then we have E minor, has kind of a darker sound to it. An F sharp diminished chord, which sounds kind of tense because it's a diminished chord. And then we come back to G. So let me just play those in sequence again, not talking over it, so you can hear as we go from top to bottom is the order we're playing. We're kind of going through these different emotional states of happiness, sadness. It's kind of this emotional roller coaster, if you will. Okay, so we're still not at chord function, but we're getting there. So let's keep on moving through these diagrams. These diagrams are essentially just showing the patterns of music, and these patterns of music are like the magic eye going to lead us to some really interesting connections between the chords that are called chord function. So let's look at the next diagram, which is we're going to take this table of chords and notice that there's this interesting pattern. Well, let's come back to this one. So when we're looking at these chords, the way that they're built, notice that as we play, we're playing every other note. So G to B skips A, and then B to D skips C. And then when we play A to C, that is, we skip B, and C to E skips D. When we play B to D, we're skipping C, D to F sharp, we're skipping E, and so on. So it's this every other pattern to form each chord. And if we look at that every other pattern in more detail, what we get is a really cool connection between the chords. So this undulating wave of harmonic connections is a fancy way of saying we're playing intervals of thirds. So by that, I mean these dark lines are major thirds. So I'm going to do major with a capital M. And these white lines are minor thirds, which I'm going to do with a lowercase m. So we have, looking at this every other, so we have this major third, and we have this minor third, another major third, that dark line, then a minor third. So I'm going to do a little minor third. We have another minor third, and then we have a major third, minor third, major third. So it's this pattern of major thirds and minor thirds. Intervals of thirds are also called tertian intervals. Tertian is just means thirds. Tertian, like turd, like I'm as if I was saying third with an Irish accent is maybe how you might think of it. So we have these intervals of thirds. And the cool thing is we have this undulating wave at the top, undulating, just waving back and forth of, this wave. But if we just flatten it out and we say, okay, look, right there from G to B, we have a major third. From B to D, we have a minor third. From B to D, we have a minor third. From D to F sharp, we have a major third, and so on. If we take that every other pattern and we look at the chords that form from that, we have a major one, and then the next chord in this wave sequence is a minor third, and then the next chord in that wave sequence is a perfect five, or a five, major five. The next chord is a diminished seven. The next chord is a minor two. The next chord is a four. The next chord is a six. And then we eventually cycle back, because music is cyclical, to that one. So we're cycling through the chords like that. So let's play those chords in sequence, and it sounds different. So far we've just been playing the chords in order of scale degree. So I'm going to play the chords in order of scale degree. So it's G1, A minor 2, B minor 3, C4, D5, E minor 6, F sharp diminished 7, and 1. Again, that just sounds like the G major scale on steroids. Oh, whoops. Okay, so if we're playing the chords in order of numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But the cool thing about this pattern is that the numbers seem kind of a little bit scrambled. We're going from 1 to 3 to 5, 7, and then 2, 4, 6, and back to 1. So basically we're playing odd numbered chords, 1, 3, 5, 7, and then we're playing even number chords, 2, 4, 6, and then we come to the 1 again. So this is what that sounds like. That actually sounds really good. But we don't just stop there. But it sounds so good, I have to play it again, because it's like, whoa, there's already kind of like a natural movement between the chords that sounds really nice. So I mean, that alone already kind of sounds like the start of the song. Like, we could play those in sequence. They sound really nice. We're getting closer to chord function with this. So let's look at this pattern a little closer and notice how with this sequence from 1 to 1, we started at 1, we ended at 1, or we started with a G major chord, we ended with a G major chord. Now, because music is cyclical, ultimately this pattern repeats. It cycles back on itself. So it's a little unnatural to be looking at this in a linear format or as a straight line. So let's take these notes, and we have this. This is just a summary of what we looked at. We have this undulating wave of tertian intervals, major thirds and minor thirds. We flattened it into a line. So really we're just looking at the same pattern, but in a line. But notice how we start at G, and we end with G. Really, it's just repeating again over here. So let's just take that and let's just wrap it onto itself in a loop. And what we get, and we're looping it in this counterclockwise direction. So we go G, B, D, F sharp, A, C, E, and G. We get a pattern of major thirds. So it's a major third with the dark line. We have a minor third with the white line, a major third with the dark line, minor third with that light line, minor third again, major third, minor third. It's the same tertian undulating wave pattern that we looked at before. It's just cycled or circled back on itself. It's formed a loop, or what you could call a circle of thirds. In essence, this is the circle of thirds that you may have heard about before. And the circle of thirds is based on, it is formed from these intervals of major and minor thirds that connect the chords in different ways. And the cool thing about this, when I say it connects them in different ways, what I mean by that is the cool thing about this pattern is that each chord like bleeds into the next. So we have a G major chord, G, B, and D. That's a G major chord, or a major 1. Or we could play B, D, and F sharp. That's a minor third or a B minor chord. Or we can play a D, F sharp, and A, which is a D major chord, and so on. So basically, all of these chords overlap. They form this daisy chain pattern of harmonies that all just like bleed seamlessly into each other, and it's called the circle of thirds. Now, we still haven't seen chord function yet, but we're definitely getting close to it. So this is the circle of thirds. This is the overlapping pattern of chords and how they connect or connected to each other. It's not random. It's definitely based on all of these patterns that build on each other. And with these chords, we can start to move around through harmonic space. Now, even though, for example, G major is G, B, and D, if we just look at this chord, for example, and just treat this as representing the G chord, we can play, for example, a G, C, D, and F. And if we move between those chords, we have G or 1, C or 4, D or 5, and back to G. So now, with the circle of thirds, we have moved beyond just pressing our fingers to play chords and being told on faith that these chords work well together. Now we're using the circle of thirds to literally map out and see where we're going. Like we're navigating harmonic space visually. We're not just relying on our ears. Music is an auditory art form, but we're also using our eyes, because music theory is a visual science. We're using the science to create the art of music, the science of theory to create the art of music. So now let's look at how these chords in this pattern, we have 7 chords, but how do we look at these chords in terms of function? Now, this is where we get to the kind of controversial part about chord function, because chord function is originally kind of developed during kind of the classical era of composition. And so, some people say, oh, it's very Eurocentric in the way that it looks at chords. And in music theory, a lot of people, are like, this is just the Western view of things. So chord function definitely reflects the classical paradigm of seeing how chords function, or the roles they serve in a given chord progression. So take it for what it's worth, but it is worth a lot in terms of understanding how these chords fit together and how you can use them to create compelling chord progressions that have momentum and direction. So let's look at the chord functions that you may hear about, which are stability, change, and tension. So we have the 7 chords of the key of G, of the major key. And these 3 chords are traditionally, and by tradition I mean, again, coming from the classical period, the chords of stability, and we'll look at why that is. We have chords of change, and we have chords of tension. And the gray ovals behind these kind of help to visually represent that, this lighter oval represents, it's more calming. There's more stability to it. We have chords of change. There's a little more darkness to that. And then chords of tension. It's almost like a cumulonimbus cloud hovering over the earth. There's some tension building, and it's going to have to resolve to, it's going to have to come back to the earth. It's going to have to come back to the chords of stability. And generally it's the 1 chord or the tonic chord in key that is the ultimate point of resolution. And that's the beautiful thing about the circle of thirds, is having in a major key anyway, this tonic chord at the bottom. It's kind of like the bottom point of gravity. And so the chords all kind of gradually want to resolve to or gravitate toward this point of resolution, which is, in this case, the G major chord. Now, the chords of stability are also called tonic chords. And it's because these 2 chords that share notes with the G major chord, the B minor chord, as you saw, is built from notes B, D, and F sharp. The G major chord includes one of those notes, G, B, and D. So these 2 chords, the 3 and the 6, share a couple of notes in common. Likewise, E minor, E, G, and B, this minor 6 chord, includes both of these notes. So E minor and G also share 2 notes, and actually 3 notes in terms of their harmonies. And so because they're neighbors in the circle of thirds and they overlap, they can kind of serve similar roles. And that's why, for example, if we're playing, let's play G, C, D, and G, so a 1, 4, 5, 1 chord progression, we can play G, C, D, G. Now, instead of resolving to this G or just playing this G, let's instead play this E minor chord, another chord of stability, another tonic chord, and swap it out. So instead of playing the G every time, I'm going to throw in an E minor chord. And notice that because it too is a chord of stability, it serves as a fair substitute. So let's play G, C, D, and we're going to go to E minor. So instead of going to G, we went to E minor, and that other chord of stability was like, oh, it's still fairly stable, so that sounds good. Or we could play G, C, D, and go to B minor, and it's another chord of stability, and it's going to sound all right. So we're going to play G, C, D, we're going to go to B minor, and then we're going to go to G. So by going to this B minor chord instead, so instead of landing straight on G, one time we went to B minor, another time we went to E minor, but either way, they're chords of stability, and because they are so close to G, that ultimate chord of stability, the ultimate chord of resolution in a major key, those 2 flanking chords are relatively stable. Then if we look at these chords of change deviate enough from these chords of stability. They create a bit of tension, but not a ton of tension. The C and the A minor are chords of change, and the chords of tension, D major and F sharp diminished, are far enough away and tense enough in relation to the tonic chords that they create chords of tension. So to just look at a really simple version of it, let's just continue with our simple 1, 4, 5, 1 progression. We're going to start at G. We're going to go to C. We're going to go to D, and we're going to come back to G. In other words, we're going to play a chord of stability. We're going to get some change. We're going to build the tension, and then we're going to come back to stability. So G, stability, C, change, D, tension, and G, stability. I'm going to play it again without talking over it so you can hear it a little better. And notice how these chords serve the roles that are labeled by the respective groups. So we're going to start G, C, D, come back to G. We could also play G, C, G to just notice how we start stability, go to change, and then come back to stability without building the tension. So right now we're just going to play G, C, back to G without building the tension, letting it mount with the tension of D. We're just going to play G, C, and G. So stability, change, stability. So you'll hear that a lot in songs. And then we're going to throw in that chord of tension, the 5. And you'll notice that the 5 chord, in this case D major, builds the tension and sounds like it's like, ooh, it really wants to land on that tonic chord. So we're going to play 1, 4, 1, 1, 4, 1, 1, 4, and then we're going to go to 5, and then we're going to come back to the 1. So it's 1, stability, 4, change, 1, 4, change, 1, 4. So that 5 chord, that chord of tension, really wants to land on that chord of stability. The 5 wants to resolve to the 1. So when you hear about the 5 wants to resolve to the 1, what does that mean? It sounds very abstract. Normally when you're talking about music theory and just using words or ideas, you can hear it. You can hear that that 5 wants to resolve to the 1, but to see it in the circle of thirds, even with all these scribbles, you can see it, that chord of tension, that 5 wants to land on that 1. And I'm just using the simple 1, 4, 5, but we could incorporate the other chords of change, the other chords of tension, the other chords of stability. And when you mix and match these different harmonic ingredients, you can come up with all sorts of metaphorical dishes, sonic dishes that use these different ingredients, these different sonic roles or these chord functions to create some really cool chord progressions. Now, again, the controversial part about chord function is that the let me get my pen back. That chord function is something that developed in the classical period, and it really best describes chords in a major key. We're going to talk about chord function as it relates to modes in an upcoming video here, but when it comes to major keys and the general functions that chords play, it's a helpful guideline to think of the chords this way. Not only think of them using music theory, you can see them this way. I want to use one example. Again, this is from lesson 7 in the course, but Love Me Do by the Beatles. It uses the chords we were just playing. It's in the key of G, and it the verse section, the intro, the verse, and the outro actually all use the 1 and the 4 to go back and forth between stability and change. That's why it sounds pleasing, because it's using chords that move back and forth. So it's love me do. So it's just using that chord progression, right? And then in the bridge and interlude section, we incorporate a little more harmonic variety in that we incorporate that chord of tension. So we go from the 5 to the 4 to the 1, and we cycle through those. And because we're incorporating the chord of tension, there's that other harmonic. So let me just get my vocals in line with the guitar. So it just goes back into the 1 and the 4. So really simple example. We're just using the 1, 4, and 5. But Love Me Do is a nice example of chord function moving back and forth between the roles of stability, change, and tension to create that harmonic movement. And you can, using these chord functions, see the song as a kind of heat map, as a harmonic heat map, where in the intro, we're moving back and forth between chords of stability and change. In the verse, we're doing it again. And then in the bridge and interlude, you can see that with the chords of tension, we're getting some more harmonic variety. And then the outro goes back and forth between chords of stability and change. And to even think of music theory as a heat map, as a visual thing, to think of the song in terms of the visuals of these chord movements is very helpful. Like I say in lesson 7 of the course, I go into way more detail on all of this and include harmonic heat maps for other songs as well, so you can picture it in this way. So lesson 7 is how chords function, and this is a very high level look at these principles at play, but it is a very useful overview of how chords function, and it's in part 2. So lesson 7 is part 2, and it's fairly early on in the course in terms of how these patterns work, and then you build from there in the subsequent lessons in the course. So that's harmonic function in a fairly concise nutshell. Definitely check out some of the details in that in the course, but maybe we can just geek out a bit and talk about whatever we can geek out on in the chat here. Virtuous Heretic, lesson 7 over at Locals. Thank you for the link. So if you go to Locals, you can also find the theory playlist at mycolormusic.com, and all of the lessons are laid out there. And every lesson builds on the last in sequence. So every lesson, you wrap your head around those concepts, and then the next lesson builds on those concepts, and so on. So it's not just randomly organized. Hey, Ricky, it's cool to have you on. Stoked to catch this live. Been watching your vids for 2 weeks now. Very cool. I'm glad that this is helpful, and I'm happy that you're here. We're geeking out together on these core principles of music theory. It's amazing to me, actually, when I first was getting into music theory, and not only first getting into it, but for a long time, all of this stuff seemed so abstract and so disjointed. I would find a little bit of information here. I'd find a little bit of information there, reading hundreds of books, soaking in so much stuff obsessively, and it all seems so disconnected. But once you see how all these patterns connect, it's like, music theory is wonderful. Hey, Keeney Music, it's cool to see you on. Thanks for joining. Dennis Mooney, hello. So how is ColorMusic notated and helpful for single note sax players? That is a great question. I don't know if I've posted the diagram for the saxophone on Locals, but I have started posting diagrams for codifying the color patterns for various instruments, string instruments, wind instruments, flute, xylophone, all of the different instruments. Saxophone, and I assume you play saxophone, which is a beautiful instrument, and just beautiful itself. It's a physically gorgeous instrument. So because it's a wind instrument, and it's not like piano or guitar in that there's a one-to-one correlation between, like on a keyboard, for example, I can press this and it's a C, or I can press this and it's a G flat. And I can see that they're tritones because they're complementary colors or polar opposites in terms of music theory. So I can, literally see the notes on the instrument. Likewise on the guitar, my finger can press the note on the string on the fret. On the saxophone, because it's different finger combinations, you can't press a sticker on the instrument, but the pattern, the different finger sequences follow the chromatic scale sequence. And so if I haven't posted that diagram, I will. In fact, let me just note that right now so that I add it. And you'll see it's a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm close to 1,000 on this description anyway. So I will post that image, and you'll see that it follows this pattern of theory. Thank you for your question. Essence recovery. Any ETA on your chord book? Okay, that is a great question, and thank you for asking. So the chord book, there's going to be multiple chord books. There's a chord book 1, which organizes the chords by chord. So all of the C chords, C major, C minor, C5, C7, C9, C11, like all of those are, and then you have all of the D flat chords and all of the D chords and so on. That's chord book 1. And I actually haven't told you yet, but I'm like 99%. I almost just finished it just before this. So I'm super excited about that. I think I'm going to curl up into a ball and cry because it was such a challenging process. So that is coming right up. I need to put the finishing touches on it and fit it into the grand scheme of the rollout of the materials on part 5. Chord book 2 is organized by key. So instead of having, C major, C minor, C diminished, and all of those organized by chord, it's the chords organized by key, kind of like we looked at here in the key of G, where you have G major, A minor, B minor, and so on. Like they're organized in groupings based on the underlying scale. That's chord book 2. And that's going to come out after chord book 1. And then the modes book, which is supplementary to, it's not part of, these chord books and mode book are not part of the course. They're in addition to, because they are standalone and you can use them without the course. That is coming out after those. And it's basically all of the permutations of these chords in a key and how to use them to paint different sonic pictures based on the sonic qualities of modes. And that is going to come after that. So I need to wrap my head around. It's like news that I virtually just finished chord book 1, which I'm super excited about. So that's not a direct answer on the ETA, but it's like it's coming together, and I'm super excited. So I'll have more information on that once I wrap my arms around it and have a good cry. Essence recovery. I'm guessing all of these chords are triad chords. So the chords that we're looking at here in this example are triad chords. So I'm going to use the keyboard. When we talk about G major, that's a triad, another reference to 3, like tertian. Triad is 1, 2, and 3. It's a 3-note chord. A minor is a triad, B minor is a triad, C major is a triad, and so on. So all of the chords that we're talking about here in this example are triads, but like in the chord books, it's getting into extended chords, 7th chords that are beyond triads. So yeah, and then the mode books work with both triads and extended chords. Jack Delaney, hey, hello everyone. Hope you're doing well as well this fine spring day. Michael Rodriguez, thank you for joining. So with this information, so we say we have a song in E minor. How do we go about chromaticism to introduce different color to the song, chord progressions being a 3-5-1 and using A flat in the melody? So incorporating an E major sound. Okay, so let's go to the first part again. This is a good question. So say we have a song in E minor. Okay, so, and that is a big part of the caveat with what I'm talking about in terms of the circle of thirds. I'm pulling this diagram up again. Let's go to this one. And So in my examples here, I'm saying that, you know, the resolution is to this one chord, right? To this G major chord in the major key. So everything I'm talking about here really relates to a major key, where the one, or the major one, is the tonic. So major one. So the question about E minor, so if we were to treat E minor as a minor one, we'd have, you know, E minor is the one, G major would be a flat major 3, B minor would be a minor 5, D major would be a flat major 7, F sharp diminished would be a diminished 2 chord, actually. Well, it's a minor chord, so yeah, it's a diminished 2 chord. And then A would be a 4 chord, and C would be a flat major 6. So the Roman numerals would change in a different mode where we're treating that minor chord as the 1. So all of these numerals that label the major chords would change. The sequence would be the same. All of the chords would still form this daisy chain pattern, but now we've shifted into a different mode, in this case, a minor key. So this would be a minor key. It's supposed to say minor, and with a minor 1. So my examples with the chord function are to a major key, where the chords of stability, change, and tension are in the context of a major key. When we talk about a minor key, chord function does change a bit. And I'll talk more about that in more detail in other videos, or at least another video. But let me get to your other parts and using A flat in the melody. So, well, E minor in this case, where we're talking about at least E Aeolian. So we're kind of getting further into the weeds, and I talk about modes in lesson 18 in detail, like crazy cool detail, but in much more detail. And so there are different minor keys. You have, let's go to, I'm using the circle of fifths here to illustrate this. So this is, I'm not going to do the question full justice right now because it's a pretty involved answer, and it's an excellent question. So in this case, we have G Ionian. Ionian is a fancy name for major. But if we rotate the numerals, we're keeping the same grouping of chords, but we rotate the numerals to E minor, we have E Aeolian. Okay. But we could play different keys, like we have E Ionian, we have E Aeolian, where E minor is the one, we have E diminished, which is over here, it's a diminished one, and it's Locrian. So if we have using A flat in the melody, I'd have to look at that and kind of wrap my arms around the question to make sure I'm answering it in a meaningful way. But basically, to the circle of thirds at least, we would need to treat the chords with different Roman numerals, different functions, and I'd need to think through the answer or make sure I understand your question with the A flat in the melody. But hopefully that kind of at least gets to an answer as far as chord function when it comes to minor keys. It's a little bit different that way. All right. Rodney, hey, it's cool to see you on. So does the melody have to go through the identical moods of the chords? That's a great question. No. So the melody, no. So the chords are, I think of the chords as kind of like on a roller coaster. You have the actual track of the roller coaster being like the melody, and then the chords are like the pillars that hold it up, you know, at different, you know, cadences or different a different pattern of chords that shore it up. It's the harmony that underscores the melody. And so the melody can kind of go where it goes. It generally, I mean, it does move in tandem with the chords because it's, or to use another metaphor, it's like the surfer riding the waves. You know, the surfer isn't disconnected from the waves. The surfer riding on the water goes up and down along with the waves, just like a melody goes up and down with the chords and follows that pattern. But because a melody can hit different parts of the chords, meaning those notes can land on different parts of a chord. It has its own qualities and can kind of it's not exactly lockstep with those moods. Yeah, that's a great question, but it is a little bit separate. Michael, so yes, most definitely thank you. Looking forward to more of these lives. Appreciate it, Mike, and thank you, Michael, for being here and for geeking out with us on chord function tonight. DL, who's your favorite Beatle? That is a great question. That's a hard question, but not really. So because my immediate answer is Paul McCartney. He's my favorite. I'm interested in who is your favorite Beatle and why. Even though Paul McCartney is my favorite as far as a songwriter, my favorite songs actually all tend to be by George Harrison. Like for some reason, the ones where I'm like, oh, that's really my favorite. Oh, it's George Harrison's song, which surprised me when I first realized that. Raul, cool. Thank you for being on. Love the circle of thirds. I took lessons and never learned this. That's awesome. Yeah, the circle of thirds is super powerful. This diagram is the circle of fifths. And in lesson 19, and other videos here, but in lesson 19, to kind of, again, a crazy level of detail, I get into the connection between the circle of thirds and the circle of fifths. They're both circles and they're both based on intervals, but they work together and are super awesome. I'm glad it makes sense. CR, hey, just wanted to thank you for being such an awesome teacher. Thank you. And I've been able to apply theory to both the guitar and the piano just based on your videos. You rock. Thank you, CR. I appreciate that. And that's beautiful that you're playing the piano and the guitar because they definitely help to see these patterns from different perspectives and reinforce and strengthen the songwriting process on both. That's like so cool. Donidri, hey, it's cool to see you on. So very helpful, the links to the songs in YouTube in the course. Yes, I'm glad that you have the links. And yeah, lesson 7 is well within part 2. And it's easy to jump into chord function. That's how I kind of wanted to jump into chord function, but learning and covering the lessons that lead up to it helps make all of this make more sense. Didn't know that Natalie Merchant songs that much. Big fan of. That's awesome. I love it. She is so good, and yeah, definitely dissected her songs, like picked them apart like crazy, to help illustrate these principles. And she's amazing. I love it. Peter, it's cool to see you on. So, did I hear you say that you're going to give a circle of thirds lesson using borrowed mode chords? Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the circle of thirds in the context of modes, or talk about modes in the context of the circle of thirds, depending on how you say it. The circle of fifths, if I had my screen live, I could show you, is much more conducive to understanding modes. But the circle of thirds is another way of looking at things. And so we'll look at these in all sorts of ways too, like playing the piano, playing the guitar, and seeing things from different perspectives. Looking at these patterns from the perspective of the circle of fifths versus the thirds is also helpful. So yeah, we'll check that out. Ricky, so can one buy this chart? So oh yes, thank you, Virtuous Heretic. So yeah, the chord map, yes, thank you. And Virtuous Heretic manages the shop and totally knows her stuff on this. So yeah, that is the process for when the orders go out, and you can find it there. And the chord map, this is what we're talking about. If this is what you're referring to, definitely makes all of these patterns come together, and where you can literally dance through harmonic space and play with different patterns to like paint the sonic pictures that are in your mind. It shortcuts the songwriting process a lot. Peter, House of the Rising Sun with A minor key Roman 1 chord would be a classic example. Yeah, I'll need to do House of the Rising Sun. It is such a good song. It's like a wonderfully good song. Yeah, and it has a really like emotive, I mean, the lyrics, of course, singing about, brothels. You can't go wrong with lyrics like that, I guess. But then also the chord progression is super emotive and is a really good one. We need to kind of like pick that one apart in further detail because it is a great example. Labella Store. Sir, let me know the schedule of these live sessions. So I've been doing these Monday night where I am anyway. I'm in the mountain zone in the US, so it's basically Denver time. And they're at 6 p.m. Monday at 6 p.m. And then every Saturday for supporters and locals, I do a Q&A, an open hour Q&A, no planned presentation, just answering questions, geeking out about music, talking about whatever. Those are Saturday mornings. So the same mountain time zone, Saturdays at 9 a.m. We can talk about whatever you like. Dave Mercer headed to Nashville. Right on, Dave. Yeah, we've got Nashville. Can't go wrong with Nashville either. Funis 13. Oh my God, you're a legend. I've learned so much with your videos. I wish I knew all of this when I had my band. That's awesome. I'm glad that it's helpful. And I wish I knew this when I was first starting out. I want to teach my kids music. Very cool. And music should be accessible. It was super frustrating for me to want to express these ideas that were in my head and then to pick up a guitar and be like, I can hear it, but I can't translate it into my hands. How do I do that? But once you see that it's all just patterns, all of this is just patterns, and they're all patterns that are understandable. It's not rocket science, but it definitely is not straightforward because music is cyclical and symmetrical. It's literally not straightforward. But once you get into that, get caught up into the loop of it, everything makes sense. So I'm glad it makes sense, and I'm so happy you're here, and thank you for being here. Do you have perfect pitch? I do not have perfect pitch. It would be nice to have perfect pitch, but being able to see the intervals, to see the patterns, makes all the difference for me. I'm a visual learner, so being able to see it is the key for me. But some people have perfect pitch, and I've always thought that's super, super cool. So yes, well, we're on the hour, so we'll wrap it up here. This is chord function in a nutshell. Much more detail, like I say, in lesson 7, and we'll geek out about these topics coming up more as we go, and more updates on the chord maps as I get a sense of how that's all looking. So hope you have a great rest of the evening, and we will see you real soon. Bye.